thing that you will see captured on camera after he The cameras also capture him as he walks past that same garage elevator lobby that he originally had entered. But instead, witnesses will tell you that he didn't go back to the garage. He went straight out to a car waiting on the side road off of Orange. Garland. Near Garland. By the time he exits, it's approximately 11:50. So 15 to 20 minutes from the time he came in to the parking garage. Two and a half hours later, as I said, is when Mr. Rodriguez was apprehended at the apartment, and the Orlando Police Department was able to obtain a search warrant and discovered in that apartment a firearm in Mr. Rodriguez's bedroom. This firearm was seized, taken to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, where it was confirmed that it was in fact the firearm that was used in the shooting. During jury selection, we talked about burdens of proof. And that the state of Florida carries the burden of proving that this crime was committed and that the defendant is the person who committed the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. The evidence in this case, I propose, will convince you that Mr. Rodriguez committed this crime beyond all doubt. So then we turn to other issues that you will have to consider in this case. And that I expect that you will hear testimony on the issue of whether or not Jason Rodriguez was insane when he gunned down Louis Beckford, when he shot at Mr. Severino, Mr. Harrison, Mr. Hickson, Mr. Luigi Mill. So I expect that you will find out that Mr. Rodriguez, starting in about 2003, somewhere consistent with the breakup of a marriage or a relationship, began to seek psychiatric care. And that this care was on and off for a period of time. And that as we approached 2006 and 2007, when he was employed by RS&H and having issues with his competence, leading to issues with his managers, that he again went to a service provider for anxiety, for depression, and was prescribed medication. Within days of his being fired by RS&H, you will find, I suspect, that Mr. Rodriguez was what is commonly referred to in the state of Florida as Baker acted, which is a civil commitment procedure for a brief period. That he was released, that he went back to his provider. There was another incident, similar incident, in August of 2007, which coincided with his job. You will also hear that during this period of time in 2007, a good 2 to 2.5 years before the shooting, Mr. Rodriguez's mother and brother had guns taken away from him and given to law enforcement. But in 2008 sometime, Mr. Rodriguez's brother, who had an identical gun to the one that Mr. Rodriguez had, sold it to him for a tank of gas because he didn't think he was having any more mental problems. Mr. Rodriguez collected unemployment from RS&H for at least a year following his firing. He worked for Orange County Public Works for a period of time. He quit there. He then got a job at Subway. Mr. Rodriguez, a civil engineer, in 2009 was working at Subway. About 6 weeks before the shooting took place, Mr. Rodriguez, who had been living with a girlfriend in early 2009, but then moved in with his mother in August of 2009, about 6 weeks prior to that, his mother left for Puerto Rico to care for a relative who was ill. His mother returns about a week before the shooting. And I suspect that during the course of this trial, you will hear from her, and you will be able to evaluate whether or not she's credible, or what she has said to others is credible about what was going on with her son in the days before the shooting. There are plenty of people who saw Jason Rodriguez on November 6th of 2009. His mother, all these people at RS&H, the police officers he came into contact with, Detective Vernon, Dave Vernon, with the Orlando Police Department, who spoke with him. I also suspect that you will hear from several individuals, psychiatrists, psychologists, who had contact with Mr. Rodriguez, not on November 6th of 2009, or 7, or 8, or 9, but days, weeks, months, even years later, who then will come and give you their opinion about Mr. Rodriguez's mental state on November 6th of 2009. During the course of this testimony, it is crucial that you pay attention, as I know you will, to not just what information they gathered and what sources they utilized in gathering that information, but even more importantly, what they didn't do, what they didn't see, who they didn't talk to. As, again, we talked about during the course of jury selection, you will get a very specific and narrow definition of what must be established by the defendant by clear and convincing evidence that he was insane on November 6th of 2009 when this shooting took place. Not whether he was insane in 2007, not whether he was having mental problems 3 weeks ago, but his mental state on that day. We will not dispute during the course of this case that Mr. Rodriguez has a mental disease or defect. That is one of the things that would have to be established. We're not going to dispute it. You will hear that it has taken various forms and he's gotten different diagnoses, and ultimately he has been diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. That is a post-event diagnosis. We won't dispute that. The other very narrow issues that you will be considering during this trial in order to establish insanity by clear and convincing evidence is whether or not, because of that mental disease or defect, on November 6th of 2009, did he know, and the legalese is the nature and quality of his actions, that's fancy language for did he know what he was doing? Did he know that if you take a gun and you load it with bullets and you pull the trigger, did he know that that would hurt or kill someone? You won't hear from any, I suspect you won't hear from any of the individuals who evaluated him that he didn't know what he was doing. So, funnel is getting smaller and smaller. There is consensus at this point. Where you will find that people diverge is the second element that you have to consider in determining whether or not Mr. Rodriguez was insane or not guilty by reason of insanity on the offense. And that is, did he know what he was doing was wrong? Even if he knew what he was doing, did he know it was wrong? They'll say no, we'll say yes. You don't need a psychology degree. You don't need to be a psychiatrist. To be able to make an evaluation on this point. We will ask you, at the conclusion of this case, to reject opinion said he didn't know what he was doing was wrong, and rely on fact, it shows that he did. Whenever Mr. Rodriguez was led into the police station after his arrest, like they've done today, the media gathered outside the Orlando Police Department, through back doors where suspects, including Mr. Rodriguez, are taken into Orlando Police Headquarters. During that process, one of the reporters from one of the stations yelled out to Mr. Rodriguez, "Why did you do it?" And Mr. Rodriguez twice responds to their question with these words, "They left me to rot." The reporter shouts, "Are you mad at your employer?" And he says, "No, I'm angry." You will have an opportunity to see that exchange, the exchanges that Mr. Rodriguez was having with the Orlando Police Department. You will hear from people aside from his mother who had contact with him on that day. And their testimony will convince you, despite opinion that you may be given, that Mr. Rodriguez knew what he was doing was wrong. The shooting and killing of Otis Beckford was wrong. The shooting and injuring close to half a dozen employees and colleagues at Reynolds, Smith and Hill was wrong. And after you've heard this evidence, you will reject the opinions in favor of fact. And the fact is that Mr. Rodriguez is guilty of all 6 charges lodged against him. Thank you all for your attention.
Good morning. This was shocking and terrifying. City of Orlando, for the employees of Reynolds, Smith and Hill, and our condolences do go out to the family and friends of Otis Beckford for their loss, for the pain that was suffered by Ms. Harrison, Mr. Hickson, Mr. Severino. Good morning. This was shocking and terrifying for the city of Orlando, for the employees of Reynolds Smith and Hill, and our condolences do go out to the family and friends of Otis Beckford for their loss, for the pain that was suffered by Ms. Harrison, Mr. Hickson, Mr. Severino, Mr. Hornbeck, and Mr. Lugenbiel. In many ways, Jason Rodriguez has had a normal life. He grew up in a home with a mother, a father, a sister, and a brother. He moved from the Bronx, New York, to Puerto Rico when he was 10. He had friends, he played baseball, he had a paper route, dated girls. He completed high school. He went on to graduate from college with a bachelor's degree in engineering. He's divorced. He has 2 children. When he was 27, he moved back to the United States, settled in Florida to be near his mother and father. He continued to work as an engineer. He actually began working on a Master of Business. His employment, however, was sporadic. At one point, he even joined the Air Force as an officer candidate, but he quickly discovered that military life was not for him. But Jason Rodriguez now lives in a different world than you and I. He's in constant fear. He's in constant torment. He hears a voice and sounds that nobody else hears. He believes that he is being conspired against, but he is told that he is delusional, that he is paranoid schizophrenic, and that he is mentally ill. In 2005, Mr. Rodriguez was working for a contracted engineering firm named PBS&J at the Florida Turnpike at a location at the Turkey Lake Service Plaza. On July 5th of that year, Mr. Rodriguez was zapped with radio equipment. An unknown amateur ham radio operator, assisted with law enforcement and a coworker named Rafael Velazquez, recorded Mr. Rodriguez's vocal frequencies and zapped the right front quadrant of his brain. Also affected his inner ear, near the cochlea, and this was all under the guise of creating an alternative communication system to be used for the Turnpike Authority. This zapping and this recording of his vocal frequencies has allowed something that he calls Sharptooth to record and listen, to hear his conversation, his speech, everything that happens to Jason Rodriguez. Sharptooth has the ability to take on many different forms, human, but he is in nearly constant contact with Mr. Rodriguez. When he is not speaking with Mr. Rodriguez directly, he is talking to others about him, or sometimes just broadcasting annoying sounds, like a buzzing or a hissing sound. Mr. Rodriguez's former employers, beginning with PBS&J at the Turnpike and his supervisor there, Mike Davis, and his co-worker, Rafael Velazquez, together later, after Mr. Rodriguez had left PBS&J, gotten a job at RS&H, where his manager was Jim Avitable, and his co-worker again was Rafael Velazquez. who may have followed him to RS&H. Later, with Orange County Public Works, the head of Public Works, and then joined by random people, law enforcement, including Orlando Police and the Orange County Sheriffs, that all of these people are working in a conspiracy with Sharptooth to torment Mr. Rodriguez, to degrade him, curse at him, threaten him and his family, to tell him what to do. That this is a conspiracy that left Mr. Rodriguez to rot. RS&H, Orange County, the Turnpike. The goal of the conspiracy, to destroy his livelihood, to destroy his resources, and eventually his life. This is the world that Jason Rodriguez has been living in for the last 8 years. But that sounds crazy, doesn't it? Crazy and insane. The definition of insanity is clear in the state of Florida. You heard it a few moments ago. The state told you that they agree Mr. Rodriguez has a mental infirmity, disease, or defect. He was diagnosed in the past with depression, with anxiety, and more recently as paranoid schizophrenic. And the key part that we're asking you to look at is part 2, that because of that mental illness, he either did not know what he was doing or the consequences of what he was doing, or, although he knew what he was doing and the consequences, he did not know at that moment that it was wrong. We will present testimonial evidence for you from experts in the field of psychology and psychiatry who will explain to you how they have come to their opinion that Jason Rodriguez was insane on November 6th of 2009. We've also spoken before about the burden of proof that the defense has in this case. A little bit different from most trials. Most trials end, the burden of proof ends with the state to prove the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. When we put forth the defense of insanity, we have something to prove. Our level of proof is slightly different. Our level of proof is clear and convincing evidence. Clear and convincing evidence is defined as evidence that is precise, that is explicit, that is lacking in confusion, and of such a weight that it produces in you, the juror, a firm belief without hesitation about the matter in issue. The matter in issue being, on November 6th of 2009, was Jason Rodriguez insane? That's what we will be asking you to look for over the next several days as you hear testimony and see evidence in this case. There's multiple levels of proof under the law. We're focusing on these top 2 steps. First, the state, in the presentation of their case, has to get you to that top step, beyond a reasonable doubt. That the crime that they're presenting to you was committed by Mr. Rodriguez. It then turns to the defense case, and we're one step down from that. we have to show you by clear and convincing evidence, again, that firm belief, that he is not guilty by reason of insanity. So ultimately, we are asking that at the close of all of the evidence, both the state's and the defense's case, that if you find that the defendant, Jason Rodriguez, committed the crime, but you also find by clear and convincing evidence that Jason Rodriguez was insane on November 6, 2009, then you should find him not guilty by reason of insanity. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're going to take a 15-minute recess at this time. I'm going to ask you not to discuss this case among yourselves, nor with anyone else, nor use any electronic devices to find anything out about this case. Any additional instructions on behalf of the state
No, sir.
or the defense? We'll be in recess for 15 minutes.
Jury exiting.